You are standing in a big open square in the most famous city of the ancient world. It is early morning. You haven't slept at all. Around you, Athenian workers are walking between rows of women, holding wax tablets and sharp sticks called styluses, writing down descriptions in a flat, calm voice, the same kind of voice a shopkeeper uses when counting bags of grain. Yesterday, you were a person from a place called Melos. You had a name, a home, and rights under your city's laws. This morning, Athens made a decision, and most people voted the same way. This is not a made-up story. This really happened in 416 BC, and a historian named Thucydides, who Athens still calls one of its own, wrote it all down without looking away. He recorded that the Democratic Assembly of Athens raised their hands and decided that the men of Melos would be killed and the women and children would be taken. What happened after that was not messy or chaotic. It was paperwork. A stylus moves across wax. Height. Roughly how old? Any visible marks? The worker's voice stays the same the whole time. He is not angry. He is just doing his job carefully. And 3 feet away, a woman who could actually read the tablet, who went to school, who had legal rights, who is used to people calling her by her name, watches her own body being described and written down as someone's property. She says something. He doesn't look up. That silence is the first punishment on this list. Not a hit, not a chain. It's the removal of her personhood, done in writing, with people watching, in the very city that invented democracy. In the corner of the square, there is a wool basket, plain, everyday, something you'd find in any home. By the end of what you are about to learn, that object will mean something completely different. If someone ever told you that Athens gave the world law and reason and protection for the individual, stay with this channel, because what we document here is what the philosophers left out of the footnotes. Subscribe now, and we will keep finding the pages history filed away. The worker finishes writing. He hands her the wool basket. She takes it. She doesn't know why yet. Days pass. The Athenian Agora, the center of city life, the same big open square where thinkers argued about what justice means, is now being used as a place to sell people. The process is organized just as carefully as the registration was. This is not an angry crowd selling war prizes in a frenzy. Buyers have paperwork. Officials watch every handoff. The woman from Melos is walked toward a cart headed for the harbor. Her daughter is walked the other way. There is no big emotional scene here. That is exactly the point. There is no dramatic moment, because there is no law that would allow one to happen. The spreading out of captured women and children into different Athenian homes, different neighborhoods, sometimes across the whole sea, that was not random meanness. Records from that time, and the bigger pattern of how Athens treated cities it conquered, make it clear that breaking apart families and social groups was done on purpose. As a strategy, social connections are a kind of power. Cutting them off was simply efficient. The word efficient will matter later. The cart reaches the harbor. An Athenian official hands the buyer a document. The buyer reads it, nods, says one word to his helper. The wool basket is sitting next to her in the cart. She picks it up. She doesn't know why, but she will keep carrying it. And what that document said, the specific things it allowed, the specific limits it set, which were almost no limits at all, is where this history becomes very hard to look at. We're about to read it with her. Athenian law was not simple or rough. That is what makes it so hard to sit with. It was careful, layered, and built so that all the pieces fit together without contradiction. There was a ranking system of legal rights so precisely made that it could absorb an entire conquered population and assign every person a category without a single rule clashing with another. At the top, male citizens. Below them, free women who had limited but real protections. Below that, freed persons whose freedom was shaky and could change. And at the very bottom, with almost nothing protecting them, were the douloi, people that the assembly had officially decided were enslaved, including every woman taken from Melos on the morning we already watched. The system that controlled what happened to her inside a household had a name. The Kurios system. The male head of the household had legal authority over every person with doulas status living under his roof. Not just a little authority, real, legal authority. Courts did not regularly step into what happened inside homes. The line where outside involvement was allowed was set so high that historians today still argue about exactly where it was. What nobody argues about is this. The punishments carried out inside that line were considered private matters, household matters, just part of managing the home. Philosophers of that time, the very same men whose names appear in school courses at every Western university, debated how much physical correction was the right amount for enslaved people of different types. The debate was not about whether it was allowed. It was about what level was efficient. That word again, because the terrible thing the document in the buyer's hand represented was not rage, not personal cruelty, not a civilization failing to live up to its ideals. It was the ideals being applied to a group of people that the ideals had decided didn't fully count as people. We know how the machine was built. Now we go inside it. The firelight in the room is low. It has been weeks since the harbor. The woman from Melos has learned the layout of the household, which rooms she can enter, which ones she cannot, which hours are watched, and which are not. She has learned to carry the wool basket without even thinking about it anymore. Tonight, there is a small fire pit near the wall and a metal tool resting in it, and another enslaved woman, herself owned, herself marked, has been told to hold something still. The physical marking of enslaved people in the Greek world was written about across many city-states and mentioned in Athenian legal texts as a way to show ownership and lower a person's social standing. It served two purposes that people of that time would have described without hesitation. The first was identification. A marked person who ran away could be legally brought back. The second purpose was the one that could not be undone by going somewhere far away or waiting long enough. The mark told everyone in every new place the person entered that this person had once been something else and had been formally lowered. It did not say slave. It said, this person crossed a line, and that line cannot be uncrossed. For a woman of Melian freebond standing, educated, legally visible, used to being recognized under her city's laws. This was the destruction of something that has no physical location, but is completely real. The ability of others to see who she used to be. We do not linger on the moment. We stay on her face. We stay on the wool basket in her lap. When it is done, she looks down at it, and something changes behind her eyes. Not despair. Something quieter and longer lasting than despair. The beginning of understanding what the basket actually is. She looks up. The enslaved woman who helped is watching her. The look on her face is not cruelty. It is not sympathy either. It is recognition. And behind it, something unspoken. Something about the woman who runs this household, who has her own kind of power and her own kind of cage. Here is the refrain. Here is the thing this story has not told you yet. The people who designed punishment inside the Athenian household were often not men. The curia, the legal wife, the officially recognized woman in charge of the home, had a lot of delegated authority over the daily lives of enslaved women under her roof. Ancient sources describe this not as unusual. Aristophanes, who wrote plays for Athenian audiences who laughed because they recognized what he was describing, listed the jealous wife and her tools of household control as comedy material, the cut hair, the smaller food portions, the locked room. The audience laughed because they knew exactly what he meant, because it was normal. But here is what the comedy was designed to hide, and what the historical record, read carefully, read without the gentle glow of nostalgia about ancient Greece, actually shows. The Curia herself was not free, not fully. She held power over those below her in the ranking precisely because the delegated power was the only official power the system allowed her to have. She could not vote. She could not go to court under her own name. She could not own property without a man's permission. What she could do, what the system allowed her, and even pushed her to do, was manage the people placed below her. She was not the one who built the machine. She was one of the parts of the machine, pointing its force at those it had placed underneath her. This is where the central question of this documentary changes forever. It is no longer simply, what did Athens do to captured women? The question is now bigger and colder. What does a system of total legal ranking do to every woman inside it, including the ones it calls free? The Curia walks into the room where the Melian woman has been kept. She is carrying the wool basket. She sets it in the middle of the floor. She says nothing. She leaves, and in the silence after, our witness understands something she could not have explained back at the registration table in Melos, but which has been true since the very first morning. The basket is not a chore. It is a border. It is the physical edge of what she is now allowed to be, and it was placed there by a woman who is herself enclosed. The courtroom is quieter than you would expect. The Athenian legal system, the institution that Western civilization has claimed as the ancestor of every modern court, is running an ordinary case. An enslaved woman's account of events is needed as evidence. And here the law reveals a mechanism so exact in its cruelty that legal historians still come back to it with something like disbelief. The Basanos, the official Athenian legal process under which testimony from an enslaved person was only considered acceptable if it was pulled out under conditions of serious physical pain. The official theory, stated clearly in the legal thinking of the time, was that an enslaved person's words carried no reliable weight unless the body was forced to produce them against its will. Records from legal cases of that time, and speeches by people like Demosthenes, mention the Basanos as a standard tool of procedure, not unusual, not something to be ashamed of, just available to use. The courtroom, the symbol, the place Athens pointed to when it wanted to show the world what it had given humanity and built into its own procedures as a regular feature rather than a misuse of the system, was the formal acknowledgement that a captured woman's voice, her story, her memory, her version of what had been done to her, carried no legal weight unless the court itself created the conditions to pull it out of her by force. Legal historians note that the Basanos was probably threatened more often than it was actually used. But the threat itself is the tool. A voice that can only be heard under those conditions is, in every real sense, a voice the law has officially silenced. The woman from Melos watches the case from the back of the room. The court empties. An official drops a wax tablet. She picks it up. She can read it. Melos educated its citizens. She reads the outcome. We do not show what it says. We stay on her face. Then she carefully sets the tablet back on the floor and steps away from it. Because even reading the law that has swallowed her is, in this city, something she is not allowed to do. Athens did not simply punish captured women. It engineered a system that turned their existence into a resource that kept feeding itself. And it did this using the same philosophical thinking that produced the Western world's first long, serious inquiry into what justice actually is. Under Athenian law, the child of an enslaved mother inherited the mother's legal status, no matter who the father was. The father's identity meant nothing. The father could be a citizen. The father could be the Kurios himself, the head of the household, the person who had legal authority over the mother's body, the man whose name was on the ownership documents. The child born from that situation was not recognized, was not freed, was entered into the same ledger, in the same column, under the same category. Inventory. The philosophical framework supporting this was not made up on the spot. Aristotle's idea of natural slavery, laid out in his book The Politics, taught in schools, debated in the same intellectual circles that shaped Athenian civic life, provided the reasoning. Some people, the argument went, were by nature meant to be led rather than to lead. This was not cruelty. It was, inside that framework, simply an accurate observation about the natural order of things. The children of those naturally enslaved inherited that nature. The logic fit together perfectly inside itself. That is exactly what made it last so long. Hold two pictures in your mind at the same time. The Parthenon catching the morning light on its hill above the city, the most copied symbol of human thinking and achievement in Western history, and in the courtyard below, a woman watching a newborn child lifted out of her arms and recorded in a wax ledger under a column heading that means property of the household. Both pictures belong to the same city. Both were made by the same civilization. The philosophy did not contradict the ledger. The philosophy explained the ledger. The worker closes the ledger, then opens it again to make one last note beside the mother's entry. One single word in the accounting column. We hold on it long enough to read it. Productive. He moves to the next page without stopping. The harbor area at night has its own geography. Torchlight that only reaches so far. Gaps between warehouses where sound travels in strange ways. The woman from Melos has been in this household long enough to know its rhythms. Which hours are watched, which are not. How long she can be gone before it looks like being gone rather than just moving around. Through paths that took months of very careful work to build, she has made contact with a Phoenician trader who sometimes carries passengers who aren't listed on the official papers. The price is more than she has. She is at the harbor anyway, because working out a plan requires actually being there. Athens built its system for catching people who ran away with the same careful precision it used for everything else. A captured enslaved person who was caught and brought back didn't just go back to their old situation. They were officially reclassified. Less food, less freedom of movement, and in cases written about in multiple Greek legal records, permanently marked in a way designed to tell every future observer about the attempt. The message was not angry the way personal anger is angry. It was architectural. It was designed to be read and understood. Even more devastating than the punishments was the system Athens built inside enslaved communities themselves. Fewer duties, better standing within the household, limited protections. These were offered as rewards for reporting information about escape plans. The community of captives, the only people close to her, the only human connection she had, was at the same time her only source of solidarity and a possible tool of her destruction. She cannot know tonight which one it is. There is a woman 3 feet behind her, also enslaved, who watched her walk to this part of the harbor. Who knows what a woman does at this hour near a Phoenician ship? Who is also quietly calculating something, though exactly what, you cannot tell from 3 feet away in the dark. The woman turns and walks away from the harbor. She does not call out. She does not look back. The woman from Melos stands alone above the ship. Then she turns back toward the household. She cannot risk what she does not know. On the courtyard wall, when she returns, something is hanging that was not there this morning. A wool basket nailed to the stone. She stops and looks at it for a long time. Then she walks past it. She doesn't know yet whether it is a warning or just a coincidence. By the end of this account, she will understand it is something more exact than either. The festival begins at dawn. Athens is dressed up for it. Free Athenian women walk through the civic center in fine wool, moving in a formation toward the temple area. Behind them, at a distance carefully measured by the festival's organizers, with the same attention a theater director gives to where actors stand, come the enslaved women in clothes that are clearly worse, carrying the heavy things needed for the procession, visible to everyone standing along the route. The ranking of people is not a side effect of the ceremony. It is the ceremony. Athens is displaying, using living human beings arranged on purpose, the distance between citizen and captive, between those the city protects and those the city has consumed. The captured woman carries her load in silence. She has learned that silence here is not giving up. It is survival math. This practice, the organized inclusion of enslaved women in public religious ceremonies as a kind of civic display, appears in the accounts of multiple ancient writers not as something shocking, but as just how things were done. The festival required it. The visual argument required bodies to complete it. A philosophy that had spent a century carefully describing what a free person was also needed. In public, the image of its opposite. She was not invisible at the festival. She was the entire point. And then there is the other tool, the one Athens kept for captured people considered a threat to household order. The Greeks called it apotympanismus. Legal scholars who have studied its appearances in ancient texts describe it carefully. It was a form of public restraint carried out through a legal proceeding, described not as an execution, which had its own civic weight and its own required steps, but as the settling of a property matter, a household complaint that had been officially heard and resolved. The city's inattention doing what the city did not need to name directly. It appears in the legal record the way a filing fee appears: administrative, expected, unremarkable. The classification of the person it was used on meant that using it required no separate moral accounting. A festival official carries a wool basket through the processional street as decoration. The city is celebrating. The basket, plain and domestic, is now a civic ornament in a ceremony honoring the power of the city that produced it. The image has arrived at its full meaning. It was never only a symbol of household duty. It was always a symbol of what Athens had decided, formally, democratically, philosophically, that certain women were for. The festival ends. The crowd leaves. The basket sits abandoned in the empty street. No one comes back for it. What happened next was almost more precise than what came before. The 19th century European Academy, building museums, writing constitutions, designing the structure of modern countries, needed an origin story. Athens provided one. Marble. Philosophy, the word democracy, pulled out of its real context and offered up as a clean inheritance. What that inheritance required was a very selective archive. The Parthenon survived. The property ledgers were reclassified as economic records. The legal texts were read as the history of constitutions rather than as systems for disposing of human beings. Thucydides' account of the vote on Melos stayed in print. It was too well known to remove, but it was framed as an exception, a cautionary tale, an example of Athens at its worst, rather than as Athens operating exactly as its legal system was built to operate. History did not lose these women. It filed them. The wax tablets, the auction paperwork, the household ledgers marked productive. These exist in archives. They have always existed in archives. The question this documentary leaves you with is not about what happened. The record of what happened was never truly hidden. The question is who decided, across 2,000 years of careful curation, that what happened was not the story Athens should be remembered for. There is a museum display case. Inside it, a reconstruction of an Athenian household interior, a loom, a wool basket, a small placard that reads, "Daily Life in Athens." No further comment is provided. If this account changed the way you think about the word democracy, if you now hear something underneath it that wasn't there before, then this channel exists for exactly that reason. Subscribe, and we will keep pulling the archive open one buried record at a time. Athens was not the only city that built its civilization on what it refused to see. Next, the women Rome erased from its own founding myth, the Sabines, the Vestals, and the legal machine the Republic used to control female existence from birth to death. That story is darker than the statues suggest.